In 1935 Egypt was still the main draw for archaeologists digging for answers. It was hardly more than a decade since the British Egyptologist Howard Carter discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun on November 4, 1922, that had lain nearly undisturbed for over 3,000 years. Yet that is another amazing story still to be investigated. However, right now our attention is focused on the latest attempt to hide the real ancient history of an unknown civilization that left us with great wonders above and below the sands of the Giza Plateau. The first news of a secret city hit the world press in the first week of March 1935. By July of that year much more had been found, and the Sunday Express ran an article by Edward Armytage, who had just returned to England from Egypt, where he had watched the excavation of a city that was then thought to date back 4,000 years. Then came the silence, as it was if every living Egyptologist had lost all interest in this wonderful underground metropolis, for all their articles during the ensuing years were centered more on tombs of queens and shafts that had been sunk deep into the ground to burial tombs sometime during the 24th dynasty, which was as late as 732 BCE to 716 BCE. I find that very odd, for such immense stories about a whole underground city going back at least 4,000 years and then ignoring it completely in favor of a late period dynasty that almost passed without notice. That was some 80 years ago, and today we have come up against a similar rose granite block wall, in the person of the former Minister of State for Antiquities Affairs, Zahi Hawass, who held that position until Egypt's revolution in 2011 that toppled Hosni Mubarak and also ended Hawass' controversial reign as the supreme chief of all Egypt's antiquities. However, he still has his finger in the pie with his favored entourage. Much has been written about the Egyptian Indiana Jones, who may have a big smile at one moment but red-raged faced the next when any unwelcome question is posed to him. This side of his character is well documented in Robert Bauval and Ahmed Osman's book Breaking the Mirror of Heaven. However, such a temperament doesn't duly explain why Zahi Hawass has so publicly announced that there is nothing at all below the Sphinx, neither any tunnel nor a single chamber, when there have many photos of him entering descending shafts from the head of the Sphinx and another at the far rear of the lion body. Are we supposed to forget completely what we have seen several times in the past and so accept such denials without question? Apparently, he brushed off such inquiries of hidden tunnels under the Giza Plateau and chambers under the Sphinx by saying that it wasn't possible to look deeper as the chambers were either blocked or full of water. That may well be the case, though we can see from one of the photos showing a rear downward shaft from the side of the Sphinx that the floor far below is quite dry. We do know that Hawass had climbed down ladders from the rear entrance of the Sphinx, into a deep chamber on a middle layer, and then even further down to a bottom chamber which apparently contained a very large sarcophagus and that was filled with water, as these scenes are all in a documentary film made by Fox. It is hard to imagine how he could possibly think that he could later on deny all what he accomplished earlier in his lifetime. Could it be that the filmed exploration was all faked? Not really, for if that was the case, and with his ego, he would be the first to say that he was just starring in a movie. Around 1798, Vivant Denon etched an image of the Sphinx, although he hadn't copied it that well. However, he no doubt knew that there was a hole on the top of its head, as he had drawn an image of a man being pulled out. That may have seemed ridiculous, but in the 1920s an aerial photo of the Sphinx taken from a hot air balloon showed that there is such an opening on the top of its head. Apparently, there are tunnels and cavities under the Sphinx that are shown in Rico Paganini's illustrations. We have also noticed photographs within web pages on the internet of Hawass looking through a trapdoor on the top of the Sphinx's head, also of him peering down into another shaft on the rear of the Sphinx. It is obvious from the totally different construction material and color of the Sphinx head, which we believe is not rock, but some type of man-made substance compared to its limestone and eroded body. The head and face of the Sphinx must have been changed from its original shape long after the monument was first carved. There is hardly any damage and no erosion on its head compared to its body. The sides of the headdress are quite smooth, and we only must glance at the mythical creature to spot the lighter color of the body to the darkness of the head. We have little knowledge of prehistoric kings of Egypt apart from what is showing on the Palermo stone, so nobody knows what the pharaohs looked like beyond 5,000 years in the past. Fashion has a habit of remaining much the same in any block of countries and in the same upper echelons of society, that trade with each other, from one era to another, no matter how the larger population of ordinary people might clothe themselves. So when we look at the images left to us by Sumerians and Assyrians 1,000 years or two before dynastic Egypt, then chances are that whoever did rule the Nile countries at the same time would have dressed much the same. Not only following the same styles of habit, but they would have shared the same mythological beliefs. Gary has shown us elsewhere in his book how lions as guardians and protectors were placed on gateways by the Hittites as well as in Egypt. I have come across one report that the Sphinx did have wings at one time, but fell off the sides, and if that was true, then we might be regarding the mythical creature as the ancients believed it to be. According to Tony Bushby in his The Secret in the Bible, a badly fragmented Sumerian cylinder tells a tale that could easily be taken as having happened at Giza and involving a monster that had a lion head with a tunnel entrance hidden by sand. Everything now points to the Sphinx body having been sculpted out of natural stone when there was frequent heavy rainfall, and that takes us back to about the same time that Robert Bauval and Robert Schoch have calculated for the construction of the Orion's Belt pyramids, i.e. circa 10,450 BCE. There have been sketches of the Giza. The word Giza in ancient Egyptian means hewn stone, complex from as far back as 1665, and some do show two heads peering out of the sands, one usually having female features. It was an ancient Egyptian practice to inscribe two lions which they called akaru next to their doorways for heavenly protection, and that would lead us directly to the mound which Gary has found and measured. One would have thought that this mystery large covered shape so close to the Sphinx would have been greeted with great enthusiasm by the Egyptian authorities, yet Hawass and Mark Lehner didn't want to listen to his theory, according to a reliable source. Gary had contacted someone in a renowned institute in Cairo that had equipment that could detect objects under the sand. That person applied for a permit to the then Supreme Council of Antiquities to investigate the mound, but they didn't respond. Apparently, no one else was granted a license to investigate the specific area of the mound where we believe a second Sphinx could be unearthed. No doubt they had a reason for it. What on earth could it be that so alarmed those two Egyptologists in so harmless but helpful suggestion that there was something that had been missed for centuries? Is it possible that they are hiding something beneath that mound? It isn't at all reasonable that anyone should have so much objection to any kind of probe or even a simple aerial photograph being taken, which might lead to the discovery of yet another amazing wonder of the world, and a wonder that would draw many more thousands of tourists to Egypt. They won't even admit to ever having examined the mystery mound themselves, and surely had this been done they would be the first to say so. A few years ago, Zahi Hawass met the Foreign Press Association in Cairo to vent his frustration with a group of pseudoscientists whose personal attack, through television and other media, had escalated to the point where it had become threatening. Apparently, he was worried that a NBC interview would support and publicize their ideas, which he suggests were purely for personal gain. He apparently said in a statement, "I want to talk about things that do not make any sense." His gesture expressed his increased frustration with what he commonly classified as pyramidites, those with views greatly at variance with the established scientific community. They are saying secret excavations connected with Atlantis are going on around the Sphinx are not being revealed. This is definitely not so. Apart from what we mentioned about Zahi Hawass, Gary mentioned that he was always very courteous towards him when answering his emails and phone calls. Perhaps it's because Gary gets on well with people and makes friends easily. Like all of us, Hawass is entitled to act the way he does, say whatever he wants, and writes about Egyptian archaeology the way he does, so we can't really blame him for that. However, he is not only a great showman and probably the most knowledgeable man in the world about ancient Egypt. Most of all, he certainly achieved a lot to promote tourism for his country. When Gary Cannon invited me to co-author his forthcoming book, The Giza Plateau Secrets and a Second Sphinx Revealed, I'm sure that neither of us could have foreseen the most explosive revelation in our subsequent hunt for answers from our discoveries. Gary already leaned towards a time frame for the building of the 3 large pyramids as well as the Sphinx as being many thousands of years older than many of us have been led to believe. He also discovered an unexplored mound on the Giza Plateau where another Sphinx is likely buried. The dream stela, which is placed between the 4 legs of the Sphinx, has 2 lions at its top. Apparently, no one except Gary had noticed that the right-hand Sphinx clearly has female features and the left male features. There are many other examples of ancient Egyptian art that depicts 2 male and female sphinxes. This is particularly strange because the lions in the dream stela lie back to back just as they do in the hieroglyphs representing Akher and Khepra, the lions of yesterday and today, and these are generally considered to be both male. Egyptians believed that after sunset the sun traveled through a tunnel inside the earth and dawn came when the sun rose in the morning after emerging from the other end of the tunnel. Akher, as the 2 lions, guarded both portals of the tunnels. Therefore, they often had the double lion statue at the doors of palaces and tombs to guard them from evil spirits, just like Chinese Fu dogs guarding temples and palaces. Perhaps the lions on the dream stela were guarding the entrance in the Sphinx which led down to the vast underground complex of temples and tunnels. We only have to look at the hieroglyph for the Akheru to understand the lions on the dream stele. When was the Sphinx carved? For centuries, people have guessed at there being a female Sphinx, and there are sketches going back to the 16th century which show such a monument. The reason for it may have nothing to do with the dream stela lions, but to place the lion-headed goddess Sekhmet into the Giza Mount frame. Gary also noticed other ancient Egyptian art that depicted male and female sphinxes. In the ancient Egyptian belief system, there were 2 lions of the mount. The meaning behind them is explained in our new book. It might be that Gary has found the second Sphinx. Its situation and the problems Gary has faced in trying to remove a sandy head covering burqa are fully described in part 2. I agreed that the Sphinx had to have been carved out of natural rock far back in the past, for the massive erosion marks and lines around the body could only have been worn away when either there were many years of tropical downpours, or when the sea washed heavy waves over the Giza Plateau. Another reason for the erosion on the Sphinx compared with little or none on the pyramids is because the Sphinx is located about 60 meters, 196.85 feet, lower than the pyramids, where water would have stayed longer when the plateau was submerged. Jerry's point is that whoever carved the Sphinx would have had to have seen the huge bedrock in order to calculate the size to carve it. Therefore, there couldn't have been any sand covering that mound. It was most likely exposed at the time when the Giza Plateau's climate was fertile, or perhaps even tropical. That being the case, it would have been thousands of years before the ancient Egyptians were there. Perhaps it was before the onset of the last Great Ice Age or the so-called Great Flood, which might have occurred when the ice melted. Such a time was at least 12,500 years ago. Even so, mainstream Egyptologists have gone to great lengths to try and discredit such a time frame. Why are Egyptian archaeologists and Egyptologists so adamant in their beliefs that they cannot keep an open mind and admit that they could be wrong? Perhaps it's because any evidence proving the ancient Egyptians had not built the 3 main pyramids on the Giza Plateau or carved the Sphinx would surely change the course of their history and also discredit their writings about those monuments. It is all well and good to live and let live, to respect the fact that others have such strong beliefs that they find it hard to accept the truth, but when they falsify names and deface monuments, such as altering the face of the Sphinx, just to make them fit with those beliefs, it is going beyond acceptable actions.